If you've ever stood in front of a mirror at the end of a long day, tired in a way that has nothing to do with sleep, wondering why the number in your account never seems to catch up with the ache in your chest, this story is for you. There's a particular kind of hunger that has nothing to do with food. You can feed it for years and it never gets full. Today I want to tell you about a man named Kieran, who owned almost nothing, and a monk who owned even less, a single wooden bowl. What happened between them changed how Kieran saw every coin he would ever hold again. There is a line the monk spoke to him, only 7 words, and those 7 words are the reason this story still travels from village to village today. But to understand why they landed the way they did, you first need to understand what Kieran had lost long before he lost his money. Before we go further, tell me in the comments, when was the last time you felt like you had enough? Not more than enough, just enough. If you're struggling to remember, you're not alone, and by the end of this story, you might understand why. Kieran lived in a small town built along a slow brown river, in a time when a man's worth was measured out loud, in the marketplace, by anyone who cared to look. He had once been a merchant of modest success, a stall of dyed cloth, a mule, a house with 2 rooms and a door that actually closed. But 3 bad seasons and 1 dishonest partner had taken it all, thread by thread, until Kieran was left with a single tin bowl and a patch of shade under the fig tree outside the temple gate. He did not think of himself as poor at first. He thought of himself as a man between fortunes, the way a swimmer between waves tells himself the next one will lift him. He watched the merchants pass with their loaded carts and told himself, soon. He watched the moneylender's son ride by on a horse with a polished saddle and told himself, soon. Every morning he counted the coins that had fallen into his bowl the day before, and every morning the number disappointed him in a new and more personal way, as if the coins themselves had judged him and found him lacking. It was in his 3rd year under the fig tree that he first noticed the old monk. The monk came to the temple gate each dawn, sat a few feet away, and ate 1 small meal from a bowl so plain it looked as though it had been carved from a fallen branch and never once polished. He spoke to almost no one. He asked for nothing beyond that single meal. And yet the merchants who walked past him, the same merchants who stepped over Kieran without a glance, would stop, bow their heads, and press coins into a small cloth beside the monk's knee. Kieran watched this happen morning after morning, and a bitterness he didn't recognize began to grow in him like a weed between paving stones. One evening, unable to hold the question any longer, Kieran crossed the small space between them and sat down uninvited. You own nothing, Kieran said, not bothering to soften it. 1 bowl, 1 robe, no house, no trade. And yet they treat you like a king. I have worked. I have built things with my own hands. And I sit here every day counting coins that never add up to enough. Tell me the trick. What do you know that I don't? The monk did not look offended. He set down his bowl, which was empty, and studied Kieran for a long moment, the way a man studies a knot before deciding which end of the rope to pull. But what he didn't know was that the monk had once owned far more than Kieran ever had. The monk finally said, though not yet answering, ask me again tomorrow. Tonight, only watch. Kieran did not sleep well. He watched the monk from across the gate, watched him eat slowly, watched him seem entirely undisturbed by the cold, by the hard ground, by the fact that when the meal was finished, there was nothing left to look forward to, and nothing he seemed to be waiting for. The next morning, before Kieran could ask his question again, a wealthy grain trader arrived at the gate in a state of open panic. His warehouse had flooded overnight. Half his stock was ruined. He was shouting at a servant, pacing, pressing his palms against his temples as though trying to hold his skull together by force. And this is where everything changed, though Kieran didn't understand it yet. The monk rose, walked to the trader, and simply stood beside him in silence until the man's shouting slowed, then stopped. I have lost everything, the trader said, his voice cracking. You have lost grain, the monk answered quietly. Tell me what else was in the warehouse. The trader blinked. Nothing else, just grain. Then you have lost grain, the monk repeated, and said nothing more. Something in the plainness of it seemed to loosen something in the trader's chest. He breathed. He thanked the monk, oddly, for saying so little, and walked away steadier than he had arrived. Kieran watched all of this with his bowl in his lap, and the bitterness in him sharpened into something almost like anger. That man has warehouses, he thought, servants, land, and he panics over half a flood. I have a tin bowl and a patch of shade, and I do not panic. I simply ache, quietly, every single day. Remember this detail. It matters later, because Kieran had mistaken the absence of panic for the presence of peace, and he was about to learn these are not the same thing at all. Days passed. Kieran began, almost against his will, to watch the monk the way a starving man watches a table he has not been invited to. He noticed that the monk never asked how much was in his cloth at the end of the day. He noticed that when children knocked over his bowl, he simply picked it up and set it right again, without the flash of fury Kieran felt when a customer once shorted him on a trade. He noticed that the monk slept the same number of hours, whether the cloth held 10 coins or none. One afternoon, a young boy, thin, quick-eyed, clearly hungry, approached the fig tree while Kieran was counting his coins for the 4th time that hour. The boy watched the coins fall from Kieran's hand back into the bowl with something like longing. Kieran, without entirely deciding to, closed his fist around the coins and turned his body slightly away, the old market instinct rising in him before he could think. But this is where everything changed a second time. He caught himself doing it. He saw his own hand curl protectively around a handful of copper that, an hour before, he had been cursing as insufficient. Not enough to matter to him, and yet too precious to share with a hungry child. The contradiction sat in his stomach like a stone. That night he did not sleep at all. He kept seeing his own fist closing. He kept hearing the trader say, "I have lost everything over half a flooded warehouse of grain he would never even notice missing from his ledgers by winter." He kept picturing the monk's bowl, empty, untroubled, sitting in the dust like it belonged there. By dawn, Kieran had made a decision. He would ask his question one final time, and this time he would not let the monk deflect it with silence or with lessons about someone else's warehouse. He found the monk in his usual place, bowl beside him, eyes half closed in the gray morning light. Kieran sat and for a long while said nothing, because he no longer entirely trusted his own voice. Finally he spoke, and his question had changed shape overnight. "I don't want to know your trick anymore," he said. "I want to know why my hand closed around coins I don't even value when a child stood in front of me with nothing. I want to know why I ache every single day, even on days I earn more than I did the day before. I want to know what is actually wrong with me." The monk opened his eyes fully for the first time since Kieran had sat down. He picked up his bowl, empty as always, and held it out, not to receive anything, but simply so Kieran could see into it. "There is nothing wrong with you," the monk said. "You have simply been asking the coins a question they were never built to answer." Kieran waited. The old ache rose in his throat, the same ache that had been there through 3 bad seasons, through the dishonest partner, through every morning of recounting. "Then answer it for me," Kieran said. "What is the question they were never built to answer?" The monk was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that has weight to it, the kind that makes the ordinary sounds of the market, a cartwheel, a dog, someone's laughter, seem to fade back for a moment to make room. Then he said it. 7 words, no more, spoken so plainly they almost didn't sound like wisdom at all, more like something a man says to himself while tying his sandal. "You are rich when you stop counting." Kieran sat with the words the way you sit with cold water on a hot day. First, the shock of it, then the relief. He looked down at his own bowl, at the coins he had counted 4 times that morning already, and understood all at once that the counting itself had been the wound, not the number, the counting. Every recount had been a small ceremony of not enough, performed on a number that had never once been the actual problem. He looked at the monk's bowl again, empty, plain, carved from a fallen branch, and understood for the first time that its emptiness was not poverty. It was the absence of a question that never stops being asked. The trader had panicked over lost grain, not because he was greedy, but because somewhere along the way, he too had started asking his warehouse a question it could never answer. The child's hunger had frightened Kieran's closing fist, not because Kieran was cruel, but because his hand had learned, over 3 bad seasons, to defend a number instead of a person. this is the part of the story that has nothing to do with monks or marketplaces and everything to do with you. That merchant, panicking over half a warehouse he'd never miss by winter. He is you, refreshing a banking app, hoping the number will finally, this time, make the ache stop. Kieran, closing his fist around coins he didn't even value. He is you, saying no to something generous your own values would have chosen, simply because scarcity got there first and set its hand over yours. The question isn't how much you have. It never was. The question is whether you have quietly decided that no number will ever be allowed to be enough, because if that decision has already been made in some unexamined corner of you, then no raise, no windfall, no lucky season will ever be able to answer it, any more than the trader's grain could answer a fear that was never really about grain. This is what the old traditions call attachment, not owning things, which is simply living, but needing things to say something about you that they were never built to say. Money is a tool for exchange. It was never a tool for proving you are safe or worthy or finally enough. When you ask a coin to do that job, it fails you every single time, not because the coin is flawed, but because you've handed it a task outside its nature, the way you'd be disappointed in a bowl for failing to keep out the rain. Sufficiency is not a number you reach. It is a decision you make, the same decision the monk made every morning before a single coin landed in his cloth. He did not decide to have enough after counting. He decided enough was already true, and then he sat down to eat. So here is what I want you to actually do starting tonight, because a story without practice is just a nice feeling that fades by morning. First, tonight, before you sleep, write down 3 things money cannot buy that you already own. Not things you hope to have, things that are already yours right now, tonight in this room. A steady friend, working hands, the particular quiet of your own home at this hour. Let the list be small and specific. The specificity is what makes it land. Second, tomorrow, the next time you check a balance, a price, an offer, or anyone else's success, pause before you react and ask yourself one question. Am I gathering information, or am I performing the ritual of not enough? Information helps you decide. The ritual only ever repeats itself. Most of us can feel the difference the moment we're honest about it. Third, choose one small, ordinary moment this week to give something away before scarcity gets a vote. A few minutes, a coin, a kind word, a seat. Not because generosity fixes your finances. It doesn't, and no one who tells you otherwise is being honest with you. Do it because every act of giving is a small rehearsal of a decision, that what you hold is already enough to share from. That rehearsal matters more than the amount. Picture Kieran now, some months later, still under the same fig tree, though the tree, like the story, doesn't much care whose shade it gives. His bowl still holds the same handful of coins on an average day. Nothing about his outer life changed quickly or dramatically, or the way a get-rich story would demand. What changed was smaller and stranger than that. He stopped recounting. Picture the monk beside him at dusk, the light going soft and orange over the slow brown river. His own bowl set down empty in the dust, entirely unguarded, because there was nothing in it worth defending and nothing missing worth mourning. If you had asked him at that hour whether he was a poor man, he likely would have looked at you the way you look at someone who has asked a question in the wrong language entirely. And here is the line worth carrying with you, long after this story ends. The one worth writing somewhere. You'll actually see it again. You were never poor because of what was in your hands. You were only ever poor on the days you forgot that your hands were already enough to hold what mattered. If this story gave you even one moment of quiet, there are more waiting for you here, told the same way, for the same tired, honest part of you that is still awake doing math at night. Next time, I'll tell you about a king who traded his crown for one night of sleep, and what he asked for in return when he finally got it. Walk gently, hold loosely,